Welcome back everyone. In this video we're going to look at counts. Specifically trying to understand how many records our SQL statement is bringing back. So let's write a select statement with a count in it. Now this statement is saying give me the number of records in the contact table within the claim system schema. Okay, and that asterisk, that star there, tells me bring back everything, bring back all the records and give me a count of the number of records we're bringing back. Now that star is telling us I'm not caring about the number of columns there are. I don't care what the attributes or the column names are in that table. All I'm worried about is the number of individual rows that this statement will bring back. And remember, we've got no conditions attached to this SQL statement, no where clause. It's a straightforward bring back of every single record and every single column. That's what the star tells us, every single column. So let's run that. And that tells us there are 134 rows within the claim system schema's contact table. Now I prefix all my tables with the schema name purely because you may well come across a scenario at your workplace or at a client's workplace where you have the same named table but in separate schemas. So it's a good practice to get into this habit of prefixing your table names with the schema name. Having said that, we've now got 134 records in that table. Now say we wanted to change the count star to say just a literal value. For example, we put in there I'm learning SQL, okay? Right, and I run that now. All you're going to get is I'm learning SQL 134 times. So what SQL is doing is saying I'm bringing back this literal for every single row in that table. And it just brings that back on the screen for you. Okay. The count function itself is what actually does an aggregation and actually tells you a numerical value for the number of records in that table. So count is a function in SQL that we use. So if we put count on either side of this, if we put count and put that literal there, it's going to give us 134 because it's saying when I go through every single record in this table, representing that record with I am learning SQL, I'm getting 134 records back. So I can put anything inside those brackets. It's still going to give me 134 because the count function says apply this function to whatever's inside this brackets and tell me how many of those I'm going to get back. I'm not asking it to print the number or print any text up there. I'm simply telling it, give me the number of rows I'm going to get back. So all that SQL is doing is actually assigning whatever is inside those brackets to every row in that table. Okay? So only if I were to remove the count function that you'd actually see the value being returned 134 times. Okay, so let's do that just to satisfy you that I'm not talking rubbish. You get that returned 134 times. Now the same applies if I were to actually specify a column name, okay? Because previously we did a star, didn't we? If we did a count, and we know there's a column called first name inside that table, and I did that now, again I'm going to get 134 because it's not being asked to print up the column value, it's just being asked to do a count for each row in that table. But there's a caveat here, and that is that column is always populated. Okay, in this scenario, if if we look at the actual column values in the contact table for the first name, we run that, we see that every single row has a first name to it. Okay. Now, there are other columns obviously in that table. If I were to choose, for example, DOB, which represents date of birth, and I ran that, you will see that in this table, there are some column values which are missing. And that's purely because the data in that table is representing other than an individual. It may be a company name, which it is in this case. It's a corporation doesn't have a date of birth. It may have a date of establishment, but it doesn't have a date of birth because it's not an individual human being. It's a organizational structure. So where we've got commercial contacts, we don't have a date of birth recorded. The question is, how does this then affect the count function? Well, let's have a look. If I did a count around this now, and I ran this, surprisingly, we're now getting only 117 records. I go back to first name, I get 134. So what does that tell you about the count function? Well, the count function is obviously not including any null values, and that's an exception that you need to be aware of. That the count will only count values in fields, okay? When you do a star, it's obviously using the entire row, okay? So there's always going to be a value coming back because you don't have a row with no values at all. Otherwise, there just wouldn't be a row in that table. But you can get columns without values. So if you limit the count to specific columns which have nulls in it, your count result will be less than the number of rows in the table. So that's your first point to note about count. Let's have a look at the entire table data, right? So that it's clear to you what's happening. Cecil, first name there. Every single row has a first name value. Every single row has something in the last name. So where you've got a commercial contact, you've got NA in the last name. But you don't always have a value in the DOB column because organizations don't have that, as we discussed. So when you're doing a count across the entire table, it's going to bring back every single row and count it. If you're going to limit it to a column which has null values in it, beware that you're going to get a count that's limited to the number of values that are actually populated in that column. Now, one way to get around this is to actually substitute something for the null value, okay? Now, there's a video on coalesce function in this series. You can go and have a look at that. And essentially what that does is say, whenever you hit a null value, choose an alternative. So you could substitute using the coalesce function the current date if you wanted, and then you'd get a value coming out for every single one of the 134 records. And then if you did a count against that, you would indeed get the 134 back. Whereas without a value in that DOB column, you would just get the 117 that we saw earlier. Please go and have a look at that video on coalesce function in the series, and that will explain exactly how coalesce works. Now, getting back to counts, I want to explain one last thing to you, and that is the use of distinct. Now, when you're doing distinct to see the number of distinct values in a column, there's something very important to note, and that is distinct will bring back a value for null. So if we did something like this, you're going to get a null coming back as one of the distinct values. However, if you were to apply a count to this, you would not get that null included because count is an aggregation and aggregations do not include the null value in them. So it's important to note that point too. Okay, and that's all I want to discuss about counts, because it's a very simple concept, just those couple of nuances that you need to be aware of. And in a later video, we're going to discuss how count works with group by as well for data aggregation. Please go and have a look at the other videos, and if you like this one, please subscribe and like and make any comments that you wish to. Thanks very much for watching.